Hello friends. On July 25, 2000, around 4 p.m., Air France Flight 4590 was ready to take off. This plane was going from Paris to New York, but it wasn't a normal passenger flight. This is the flight of the supersonic Concorde plane, an aeroplane which travels at double the speed of sound. You can compare its speed with a bullet shot from a gun. Normally, passenger flights by normal airplanes take 8 hours to travel from Paris to New York. But this supersonic Concorde airplane can travel this distance in a mere 3.5 hours. It's also special because this flight was full of rich people. Flying in Concorde is considered a luxury. It is not something which can be afforded by an average person, because a round-trip ticket between Paris and New York costs $12,000. And this was 22 years ago. Taking inflation into account, it would be around $20,000 in today's money. At 4:40 p.m., this flight was ready to take off and start speeding up on the runway. As soon as this airplane picks up speed on the runway, the air traffic controller in the airport spotted a fire under the plane. He informed the pilot. But by then the plane was already going quite fast, and by then it was too late to abort the flight. The plane couldn't be stopped. That's what the pilot told the air traffic controller. Within seconds, this plane takes off, and the fire keeps building up, and soon the fire went out of control. The pilots of the plane try to level it. They switch off some engines, and it was found that the plane couldn't reach high speeds. People on the highway near the airport spot the plane from their cars. The scene was truly shocking. Within minutes, the pilots lose all control over the plane. And then the plane crashed into a hotel 15 kilometers from Paris. In this crash, all 100 passengers of the plane, all 9 crew members, passed away. The world's most prestigious aircraft crashes. More than 100 people are dead. This plane crash shocked the world. People couldn't believe it. How could this be? This was the most prestigious airplane, the top-class airplane in the world. The Concorde supersonic airplane. How could this crash? In the history of the supersonic Concordes, this was the first and only plane crash. Neither did any Concorde aircraft crash before it, nor did any after this. But this one plane crash altered the history of supersonic aircraft forever. The word supersonic is related to sound, to the speed of sound. Normally, the speed of sound at sea level is approximately 1,236 km/h. It's approximate because the speed depends on the temperature of the wind as well. If the temperature is fluctuating, the speed of sound will also fluctuate a bit, but more or less, it is around this number. The speed at which an aircraft travels can be divided into 4 categories. Broadly speaking, if the speed is less than the speed of sound, it is called a subsonic airplane. If it is around the speed of sound, transonic. If it is more than the speed of sound, supersonic. And if it is more than 5 times the speed of sound, hypersonic. Friends, the unit of this speed is Mach. Mach is basically the ratio of the speed of the aircraft and that of the sound. The airplanes that we normally fly in, the passenger aircraft, have a speed of around 900 kilometers. They fall into the category of subsonic. The Concorde aircraft was because the aircraft no longer exists. We'll talk about why it doesn't later in the video, had a speed of around 2,160 kilometers/h. It is almost around Mach 2.0, while the present-day passenger jets fly at around Mach 0.8. As a fun fact, in case you were wondering about the speed of the fastest aircraft now, it is Mach 3.3. More than 3,500 kilometers. It is the fighter jet Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird. The next version of the model is the SR-72, which is under development now. It is said that it will complete its first test flight in 2025. It is being said that its speed will be more than Mach 6.0. In this case, it will go beyond supersonic and fall into the category of hypersonic, because this is the category of speeds ranging from Mach 5.0 to Mach 10.0. The sonic boom. Friends, do you know what is the most interesting thing about supersonic aircraft? Whenever these airplanes fly, a sonic boom is generated. The planes fly faster than sound. The sound waves around normal passenger jets curve like this. But the supersonic speed is so fast that the sound waves begin overlapping with each other. Due to this, a sharp sound similar to thunder is produced, as if there's a huge explosion. This is known as the sonic boom. If you are standing under a passing supersonic airplane, you will be able to hear this sonic boom. You can compare this to bursting a balloon with a pin. The pressure of the air inside is released in an instant, which causes the loud bursting noise. The same thing happens on a bigger scale with supersonic airplanes. Many people confuse this with vapor clouds, such as in this photo, the cloud forming around the flying aircraft. These vapor clouds do form around supersonic airplanes, but they may even form around transonic aircraft. This phenomenon occurs when the transonic airplane flies through moist air. When there is a lot of humidity in the air, the air pressure drops rapidly around the wings, and there is a drop in the temperature as well. The moisture in the air converts into a cloud. We can often spot this cloud vapor effect when an airplane breaches the sound barrier. But it is not the only scenario when it happens. History of supersonic flights. Supersonic flights have an interesting history. You might think that it is a newly discovered technology, but actually, humans had broken the supersonic barrier in 1947. Cracking the sound barrier in the X-1 marked another milestone in aviation history. On October 14, 1947, Major Charles de Gaulle of the U.S. Air Force became the first pilot to fly an airplane at supersonic speeds. He achieved this feat above the Mojave Desert in America. After this, big businessmen and commercial airlines became interested in supersonic aircraft. They questioned why were the supersonic aircraft reserved for military purposes. They wanted to build similar flights for normal passengers, one that could travel at supersonic speeds. A lot of work was put into it for about 10 years. But in the early 1960s, in the midst of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, the aerospace industry in the US diverted its focus towards space. They were more interested in landing on the moon, in developing spacecraft, in comparison to airplanes. The developments in the supersonic sector shifted to Europe. Rise of Concorde airliner. France and Britain came together to sign a multi-billion-dollar deal for research. On November 29, 1962, both governments presented the Concorde Agreement to the world. As per the agreement, both governments were supposed to build a supersonic jetliner, which would be used for the passengers, not for the military. Some years later, in March 1969, the first successful flight of the Concorde aircraft took place. Ascension continuing, the nose has come up to 20 degrees. She flies. And just like that, within the next few years, Concorde became the world's first supersonic flight, where not only military personnel, but civilians as well, could now travel at supersonic speeds. The tagline of the flight was "Arrive before you leave," because it could cross the Atlantic Ocean from Europe to America in half the time. It is very prestigious for Concorde that even till now, it is the only commercially flying supersonic aircraft. And you might be surprised to know this, 90% of the airplanes built now are built by two companies, Airbus and Boeing. There's almost a duopoly of these two companies. Perhaps the most unique thing about these aircraft was the nose of the aircraft. The nose at the front could be adjusted by moving it up and down. During the takeoffs and landings, to ensure that the pilots could see and get proper visibility, the nose could be drooped downwards. And when the airplane flew in the sky, it could be moved upwards for better aerodynamics. Its interior wasn't very spacious compared to the present-day planes. It could carry 100 passengers only. The interior used to be quite simple initially. Eventually, with time it became more luxurious, because the cost of the tickets for this airplane was not cheap. Since only the rich were purchasing its ticket, the airline decided to upgrade the interiors to be more luxurious. Eventually, things like caviar and champagne were also served on the plane. And traveling in this airplane had become akin to a status symbol for the people. In the 1990s, the biggest superstars in the world, celebrities, sports stars, politicians, Everyone had at least one flight in the Concorde aircraft. Even former British Prime Minister Tony Blair had traveled in the plane. During its illustrious career, Concorde had an amazing safety record. There were no problems with these flights. In more than 25 years of this plane being flown, there weren't any plane crashes. Safety was a priority here. It included luxury as well. But all of it changed on July 25, 2000. Air France Flight 4590 crashed near Paris. I talked about it at the beginning of this video. All 109 people present in the plane perished in this crash. After the investigation, it was revealed that the plane that had taken off from the runway before this had left behind 17-inch metal bit on the runway. And when this Air France flight got on the runway to take off, the small bit of the metal struck its tire, slashing the tire. Though the tire wasn't punctured, the small bits of the tire lit the underside of the left wing of the plane at high speed. This created a high-pressure shock wave. Due to this, the fuel tank burst. The plane hadn't even taken off, that the fuel had started leaking, and because there's a lot of heat there, the plane's wheels have a high RPM, and the engine was running as well. The heat from all of that caused a spark in this fuel. The air traffic controller noticed this fire catching on, but it was quite late by then. The plane couldn't be stopped anymore. The plane took off, and the fire kept spreading rapidly. The pilots of the plane couldn't get the fire under control. They tried to turn off the engine. The plane started slowing down, and eventually it crashed into a hotel. As I told you, this incident shocked people from all around the world. Because till then, everyone believed that being on this plane was highly safe. It was a matter of prestige and status. It can be compared to the Titanic. People believed that the ship Titanic was unsinkable. Similarly, Concorde was a prestigious plane that couldn't crash. After this crash, the reputation of the plane was lost. Air France and British Airways decided together to temporarily retire all the Concorde flights until they complete their investigations. A few years later, in November 2001, they reintroduced the Concorde flights. But their business couldn't recover. There were several reasons for this. The ruined reputation of the airplane after the plane crash. This was one of the most obvious reasons. But apart from this, in November 2001, at the time when this airplane was reintroduced, was a terrible period. We know what happened in September 2001. The World Trade Center was attacked, which led to the aircraft industry coming to a halt. People were scared to travel in airplanes. Additionally, there were some drawbacks with the plane as well. The sonic boom I told you about, it is truly amazing when you experience it for the first time, but if you have to listen to a sonic boom above your home every day, it would turn into a nuisance for you. The people living in the path of the supersonic airplane were very bothered with this. The noise levels in the Concorde were excruciatingly high. To keep the noise levels down, the airlines decided that the flight route of Concorde would be mainly above the oceans, rather than above land. Even so, people living near the airport's downfall of Concorde started protest against the Concordes. Another problem was fuel consumption. In comparison to a normal passenger airplane, the fuel consumption in Concorde was 4 times that. Neither was it good for the environment nor for the economy. And finally, we come to the last major reason: the costs to maintain and operate these planes were really high. The annual cost of maintaining the Concorde fleet for British Airways was £1 billion. That was back then. Today, it would be around £1.7 billion. If you look at this from the perspective of the passenger, spending 1.5 million rupee on a flight ticket just to reach quickly, but at the end of it, you'd be sitting in this seat. And it's not even a spacious seat. It is better to be spending the same money on business class or first class seats. At least you can lie down. You get more luxury in a sense. There wasn't a high enough demand for it, but whatever there used to be dwindled down after the plane crash. Due to the ruined reputation, the Concorde flights started becoming emptier. Due to these reasons, in 2003, Air France and British Airways had decided that they would shut down their Concorde flights permanently. On October 24, 2003, the last commercial Concorde flight took off. It was the last supersonic flight in history. Today, almost after 20 years, no supersonic commercial flights exist. Normally, when we talk about any topic in any sector, we see technology progressing. But this is one of the rare spots where technology has regressed. Logically, you might wonder how this came to be. Supersonic flights should have become more common nowadays. Who doesn't want to reach sooner? Everyone wants airplanes to travel faster, but this is the unfortunate story. But do you know what's good about this? In the near or distant future, supersonic aircraft will make a comeback. The drawbacks of this technology are being worked on, with new solutions being developed. A recent startup, Boom, builds supersonic aircraft. United Airlines, a major American airline, announced that they have ordered 15 planes from this startup. The planes would travel at the speed of Mach 1.7. They have named it the Overture aircraft. If this deal is successful and everything goes as planned, you will see these airplanes back on the runway in 2029. 2029 might be the year when we'd be able to get on a supersonic aircraft once again. Environmental damage was one of the most significant negative points. To counter that, the company has claimed that they would use only sustainable aviation fuel, the ones made up of biodegradable materials. They also said that the aircraft they're building is being manufactured using net zero carbon emissions methods. Future of supersonic planes: no extra carbon dioxide is produced in this process. Keeping the environmental impacts so low to make it economically feasible and to develop the technology with time is not going to be easy. Interestingly, even if the Overture aircraft are launched in 2029, its speed will still be less than that of the Concorde. They'd fly at Mach 1.7 in comparison to the Mach 2.0 at which the Concorde used to fly. Even after this, Concorde would remain the fast passenger jet. But even at this speed, one of the direct benefits will be that the flights from Dubai to Singapore, which take 7 hours nowadays, would take only 4 hours in these airplanes. If you think it was an interesting video, you can watch my other airplane-related videos, in which I talk about the other airplane mysteries. Do click on this playlist